Welcome to this retrospective / review for the video game Castlevania Circle of the Moon. And I'm just going to let some footage roll in the background that I recorded yesterday while I was trying to do a little bit of farming for healing potions. Something I probably should have done for sure before I took on Dracula, but, you know, better late than never, I suppose. And one of the things I did also while in doing this video is I also went to the battle arena and gave that a try unsuccessfully for a couple of times. But I was thinking, do I want to add the battle arena as far as make a video on it? And honestly, when I looked at it, I didn't really feel like adding the battle arena would be a good value added, really. Mainly because it just cut out all the music. It was like no background music whatsoever. It was just basically fight a bunch of enemies. And so, you know, if you play a Castlevania game without any music is, well, it's just a crime, to say the least. Because one of the best things about Castlevania, at least in my own humble opinion, is the music. And this game, it continues to live up to that tradition of having good music. There are a lot of remixes from other Castlevania games, and here quite a few. Like, for instance, I know for sure Vampire Killer is in there, but there's I think a couple from Super Castlevania 4 as well. So there's a lot of remix tracks. I don't know how many original songs were included in this. I'm sure there was at least a few, to say the least. But overall, the tradition of excellent music continues to be a hallmark of the Castlevania series, at least with this particular game. Visually, I think the game looks very good. It probably looks quite a bit better. Now, to be fair, I played this with the Castlevania Advance Collection on Steam, so it probably looks a lot better than, say, playing it on the original Game Boy Advance hardware when you're dealing with a little small scrunched up screen. And the screen resolution or aspect ratio works really well here. They do have the sidebars, but other than that, it's just looks really good. And visually, I want to say, is it on par with, say, Symphony of the Night? Probably not quite to that level, if we're being completely fair. But I do think that it looks just as good, if not better, than most Super Nintendo games. So definitely from that perspective, visually holds up. A lot of variety with enemy types, though there are a few palette swaps here and there. But yeah, visually and from sound quality perspective, absolutely brilliant game. The control is actually quite good. The Game Boy Advance control scheme, I feel, is one of those that it's simple yet also complicated or complex enough so that you have enough options with the L and R and the A and B options. Now, this, again, because the Advance Collection does have the added benefit of having certain things mapped to the X and the Y buttons. Now, I didn't use Y too often, but X to bring up the map is very, very handy. So that was obviously something that wasn't there on the original Game Boy Advance. Actually, I'm not exactly. I don't even remember how you would actually really pull up the map on the Game Boy Advance. Now, I guess probably by hitting select. Most likely, probably hitting select to pull up the map. But other than that, I mean, very slight modifications from the Game Boy Advance original, but it works very well here. Control is very crisp. Just a lot of variety with the stuff that you can do in the game, and it holds up very well from that perspective also. Now, from a challenge perspective, there was definitely some challenge to this game. Probably not as much as, say, some of the more traditional classic Castlevania games, but I will say the boss battle against Hugh Baldwin and obviously Dracula was definitely it was definitely up there with the challenge. A big portion of that does fall on me, to be completely and totally fair, and the fact that I didn't plan well enough ahead of time to try and get a little more healing. But that also does bring me to one of my criticisms of the game, basically, and that's the inventory system. Now, the inventory system I don't actually have a problem with. I think the inventory system works very well. But the problem is there's no store like you saw in Symphony of the Night, basically. Now, would that have made the game easier? Quite possibly. It really would have. But at the same time, you're building up all of this backlog of stuff. Like, I don't even know how many pieces of leather armor I had. Is probably ridiculous how many pieces of leather armor I had. But you can't sell any of the excess items. And I feel like having that ability to sell items would have been very useful. That's something you could definitely do in Symphony of the Night. And I'm pretty sure other Castlevania games. Actually, right. Last one I played was Portrait of Ruin, actually, and I do remember there being the monk there that you could sell stuff to. So that aspect not being here in the game is kind of a bit of a wasted opportunity, to say the least. I feel like it would have added a little more depth to the game. And then instead of trying to farm potions, I could have just gone and bought them. But you could have still had it to the point where, like, certain rare items, rare drops, were still just that, rare drops. In this case, though, that was your only option, and I think that was a little bit of a limiting factor. The other thing I'd like to say, the game itself is actually a very interesting mix of classic Castlevania and the more traditional, or I guess the classic Castlevania would be more traditional, but the more Metroidvania style of Castlevania games. So from that perspective, it's a very interesting mix, because you do have hearts and you use them to power your sub weapons. It's been a while since I played one of these, so that may have been actually an aspect of Symphony of Night. I just, off the top of my head, I can't remember if you actually used a lot of hearts or whatnot in the game. It's just kind of left my mind at this point. But from that perspective, like I said, it is a very interesting combination, I feel like, but it definitely does obviously skew more towards the Metroidvania style of play. The card system itself is also another area of both criticism and praise, basically. So I do like the card system. I think it's very interesting, but it's not very intuitive for a lot of cards. And the reason I say that, because each of the card combinations does something. But the problem is, you don't know what the card combinations do unless certain triggers happen, basically. So for instance, like you see the card combination I have now, when I had that selected originally, I didn't know what it did, because it just kept saying, question marks, and didn't tell you what it did. And you don't learn what it does until you get hit. And once you get hit, then you realize it does half damage. So there's a lot of the abilities like that, the card abilities, that you just don't know what they do until certain conditions are met. Now, the ones that are a little more offensive focused, they pretty much tell you what they do from the word go. But the other ones, they don't. And the other thing that they don't really do is they don't tell you any key combinations. I want to say it was the Pluto card. Basically, there's a lot of combinations or attacks. I think maybe, was it Neptune? The Neptune card as well. But there's a lot where you basically go from down, forward, up, and hit the attack button. And when you do that, it will trigger an effect. But it's without an actual guide to let you know to do that, you're just basically guessing what has to be done. One of the things that would have made the game a lot easier for me, I feel, was if I knew that I could have got healing early on in the game, because I had the right card combination. I just couldn't tell from actually looking at the end game menu what what the card combination did. And so from that perspective, I think they really, I don't know, I wasn't as big a fan of the fact that they kept it hidden what each of these card combinations did. So from that perspective, I do find that as a valid criticism, at least in my opinion. But, you know, at the same time, the cards do add quite a big, interesting aspect to the gameplay of the game. So it's a very interesting concept. I just wish they had executed it a little bit better with the documentation, for lack of better words. Other than that, I think the playtime of the game is actually, I'm not going to say it's short. It really does depend a lot on how you play the game. You can make it short or as long as you want, basically. But there is a little bit of grinding that will be required of you here and there, not just to grind for experience levels, but also like grind for hearts if you want to have a better chance of taking on a lot of the bosses. And besides the two bosses that I've already mentioned, Hugh and Dracula, I think most of the bosses really weren't too terribly challenging for me. I'm trying to think back to some of the earlier ones, and I can't really think of any of them that were super challenging. But you know, there were some, and if I had probably gone to them at a lower level, it would have been a little more challenging, to say the least. Anyway, at the end of the day, with a little bit of grinding, or level grinding, I should say, the game itself isn't super difficult, but you know, it's not easy either. Now, I do want to do one guilty admission, though. After I did get through the battle arena successfully here recently, I went ahead and went around to all the areas of the maps, and there were actually quite a few rooms I missed. I want to say somewhere in the vicinity of like 5-7 rooms that I actually did not get, so I didn't get 100% map completion initially. And just because I'm a stickler, I wanted to get that 100% map completion, so I did. And I wanted to go back to Dracula now that it's a little bit more leveled up. I think I was level 56, and I, you know, had healing potions available, and I actually had a better idea of what the cards did. I actually still used the same main card combination against him that I did originally, but with the improved armor from the battle arena, I really did put the smack down on him, and that did make me feel pretty good. Not gonna lie, it made me feel good to basically beat up an old Drac. But anyway, the game itself is definitely a very good game. Not just a good game from a Game Boy Advance perspective. It's just a good game in general. Doesn't quite live up to some of the later Castlevania games that came out on the Game Boy Advance and the DS, for instance. But I do think it is a good game and definitely worth your time. The Castlevania Advance collection is pretty much on every platform, so there's really no reason not to go around and get in the game. It's not like you have to get a ROM and chase it down that way. And you know, hindsight being 2020, even on my Wii U, I don't believe it was available in the Virtual Console store. So this really is the only way that you have legally of getting the game, you know, outside of the secondhand market, of course. But definitely the Castlevania Advance collection is worth it, because you don't get just this game, you get 3 other games as well with it. So a very good, fair asking price, I believe. And from a performance perspective, the emulator and whatnot works just great with the Castlevania Advance collection. Now, you could probably play this with your own emulator and link everything to a Retro Achievements account. And for some people who do prefer to do that, me being one of them actually to a certain extent, that's an option for you. But I do want to say that in this particular instance, Konami did a good job with the Advanced Collection, the fact that they actually gave the game more than a single achievement like they did with the previous Castlevania Anniversary Collection, excuse me, where this basically you had just like one or maybe two or four achievements depending on the game. Like I remember like Bloodlines, basically it said beat the game with I forget his name, Morris. I think John Morris or Eric LaCar. So that was basically 2 achievements. But then others are like just beat Castlevania 1, and that was just 1 achievement. This game, they actually did a little bit better of a job and actually gave you 11 achievements tied to different parts of this game. So I think they did a much better job from an achievement perspective with this as well. But for those who want an even bigger selection of achievements, then the retro achievements option probably does exist for you there. Though I would, recommend giving Konami some monetary compensation for the Castlevania Advance Collection to justify, emulating it, which is what I would probably end up doing. Because I do like to purchase the games when they become available. I'm not a big fan of the fact that Konami dragged their feet for so long before finally giving us this collection, because the collection itself is only, 3 years, maybe 4 at the most old. It's a pretty new collection, all things considered. So they really did drag their feet on this, but any encouragement that you can give them to actually show some love to this series again would be something that I think would be definitely appreciated, because this just used to be one of the best Konami series around. Me personally, it was my favorite Konami series, and I just wish they would give it the love it deserves yet again. And even though this technically is not a canon game, it's more of a side quest type game as far as the official timeline is concerned, I still think it is very good, and it's not just a side game because it's different. It's just a good game all in all, and it's probably one of the best side game non-chronological Castlevania games that you'll play. So definitely give it a thumbs up in that regards. And it's not perfect. I don't think it's the best Castlevania Metroidvania that there is out there, but I would definitely rank it at a 90% because it's a very good game. Some minor flaws, but at the end of the day, I think it's definitely a good time, and I enjoyed my time with the game. I still have a couple of achievements to get, but other than that, it was definitely a good time. So anyway, that's my thoughts on the Castlevania Circle of the Moon, and I will look forward to playing some more games later in the series, in this collection and the Dominus collection. But for now, I'll say thank you very much for watching this video. I'll see you all in the next one. Take care.